At ACC Kickoff, head coach Mario Cristobal and quarterback Tyler Van Dyke both spoke very highly about wide receiver Jacolby George. David, you had a one-on-one with Mario Cristobal, and he gave this quote. I'm going to read it. We're going to react and kind of talk about our thoughts about Jacolby. But in the quote, it says, Jacolby George has taken the biggest step of the returners, and he needs to. He is a guy that needs to come up big for us and take that next step of being consistent. He has had a great offseason, and he had a great spring. He has changed his body some. Essentially, that's part of it. Again, Cristobal continued to say positive things about it. Van Dyke did as well. So essentially, is Jacolby George going to break out this year in year 3 for him?
Well, I think, how do we define breakout? So I think he's set to have by far his best season at Miami to this point. What does that mean exactly? I think that's where the nuance of the conversation needs to go. I will say I was a little surprised that Cristobal said of the returners, because I would have assumed if he was picking someone, he would have picked Colby Young, who has also changed his body, looks great in spring ball, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe that speaks to maybe where they thought Colby Young left off last season compared to Jacolby George. I do think Jacolby is a guy that is talented. I don't think the process in terms of improving has always been there early in his career. But Mario Cristobal was essentially telling me that it's clicked this offseason. He's taken that next step in his maturity level. And everyone believes in his talent. Tyler Van Dyke told me too in a one-on-one, he thinks Jacolby is that guy that we saw flash a little bit in 2021 against Duke when he was making some acrobatic catches. We know he's athletic like that. He has, big hands relative to his height that allow him to pull off some of those spectacular catches. But I'll admit that I am a little more intrigued by the transfer Tyler Harrell. And I think both guys are going to play. Harrell and George, I would expect to rotate. But I like Tyler Harrell slightly more because of his speed threat, elite speed, can take the top off the defense. And, I just think he has more explosive potential. But Jacolby's going to play a lot. I think he's going to produce. Again, I think he's going to have his most productive year at Miami. What does that production look like? That's where I'm not quite sure, because I do think him and Tyler are going to rotate in and out. But I think it is, partly too, Mario Cristobal sending a message of affirmation to Jacolby, letting him know, hey, I see the work you're putting in. I appreciate the work you're putting in. Now it's time to go and produce here this season. Let's make the most of that work.
You touched on that Duke game there, 3 catches, 80 yards, the big plays to end his true freshman season there in 21. And I think a lot of people, us included, thought he would essentially take that and run with it in 2022. You kind of look back, it kind of reminds me of a Herb Waters, the way he finished his true freshman year and kind of used that to vault himself moving forward in his career. And we just didn't see that with Jacolby. He gets suspended to start it out. Last year, he ends up at 13 catches, 130 yards, no scores. So 10 yards a catch. You're not seeing the big plays there. And it's interesting. This is a guy that's played 16 games and he's only scored the 1 touchdown in his debut there in 21. So he's not really reached the end zone. We do like his talent. We've talked about it, all on our platforms, whether it's writing, talking, or, these kind of things, or, just conversations with each other. We do like his talent. The reason why it's not just that quote from Cristobal, but again, they kept saying it. We saw it in the spring in terms of he was the guy at the top. He was in that first team with Restrepo and Colby Young, and Jacolby was there. He was essentially getting all the first team reps. And this is a guy that, having his best season, he hasn't hit the 200-yard mark in a season. So certainly you would expect that. But can he break out, essentially take this hype that he's getting from the offseason and have one of these kind of get closer to over 500, 5, 6, 7, one of these kind of seasons, really put it all together. I think the thing with Tyler, and certainly when we did our top 6 rankings, we both had Tyler. We both had Tyler over Jacolby, but we had it in a tight battle. I think we both kind of see it as the 3-4. Essentially that's where we see it in terms of all of them. But yeah, I think Jacolby certainly has a talent to do so. I wouldn't be surprised, just hearing the talk. This wasn't like one of these things where you say, hey, what about Jacolby George? And then they answer. They were essentially, It was an open-ended questions, the way both these have come out. And so they really like what they've seen. And Jacolby has talked about wanting to turn the corner. He said that in the spring. So we will see. But the production has simply just not been there consistently enough, even though the talent has been there. So I think he's got the potential to break out. I think he definitely does. I don't think it's one of these situations where it's like, well, I don't know if he can really put it together because his talent, those kind of things. I think he's going to have opportunities early. We talk about guys that come in the summer. Tyler probably has a little bit of a learning curve just to get used to it. And I think Jacolby's going to get that first crack. But if he can take it and run with it, do really well in these games, maybe even the Texas A&M game, it was actually the way it worked out. That was his season debut last year and ended up being the most yards he had in a game, which 41. Nothing big, and Miami does lose that game, but maybe Jacolby has a big game there and really essentially takes off in that role. So we'll see there with Jacolby, but certainly the talent's there. Kind of putting it all together is a big key for him.
Yeah, and last year too, it's worth mentioning he broke his hand, I believe, in that Texas A&M game. So that kind of derailed his season a little bit, maybe from what it could have been.
Missed the next 3 games. Yeah.
Right. He did go and have a good spring game performance, if I remember correctly. Had a touchdown or 2. So the talent is there. I think it's more about just the trust factor, putting in the work factor. He has, I think, see him at some of the summer camps. He's definitely matured his body in the weight room. So that's a strong indication of the work he's been putting in. For me, though, like if I was going to pick a breakout wide receiver, maybe it's cheating, but I would still pick Colby Young because, technically he didn't have 400 receiving yards last year. I think he's a guy that could maybe push 800 receiving yards this year. So to me, that's a breakout year. Jacolby, I think 500 yards is a fair expectation. But he definitely has a potential, especially in this offense. I think this offense is a much better fit than last year's offense for him. He can definitely go out and produce in a big way in this Shannon Dawson offense.
I think reaching the end zone is going to be key for him. This is a guy we do like his fluidity. You touched on his hands there. He does have the ability to make acrobatic catches, but you've got to translate into some points. And I think finding the end zone, whether it's catching the long passes or making the essentially the red zone catches, the tough catches right at the pylon, whatever it might be with Jacolby, I think just kind of finding the end zone will be really important for him this season because I think, he has the ability to kind of mix up some things. Again, I like the way he runs routes. I like his hands. I like his ability. Again, it's really basically translating your talent to production and being reliable, whether it's health or off the field things. And I think those are the things Jacolby's got to turn the page on, and it's got to be a consistency thing. And you touched on the hand thing. He comes back, he has the 5 catches against Duke, but then he only finishes with 5 catches over the next to end the season over the next 5 games. So again, you kind of just, it was one step forward, a couple steps back. It felt like last year, even with the offseason, it felt like he was doing okay. It looked like he was going to essentially take that next step. And then, it comes out of the gate, he's not playing for the first couple games. So Jacolby's got to come out of the gate strong. I think fall practice will be big. I think maybe even having a guy like Tyler there, Tyler Harrell, maybe essentially pushing him, or essentially if Jacolby doesn't get his stuff together on a consistent basis in practice, Harrell is certainly ready to do that. He's a veteran guy. He's been at Alabama, productive at Louisville. He's certainly looking to do that and certainly more than capable of having big plays. And we still, if we were to, hear new talk and kind of still my thoughts, I still have Harrell as a top guy at this point. So we'll see though. Jacolby certainly has the ability. A lot of fans like him. They're ready to see him break out. Miami needs some guys to break out on offense. There's no doubt about it.